First of all, Mr. Ross, is the economy stupid? Can we still use this quote, which Mr. Clinton said during his campaign? Is this election about the economy?
Yes, but you've got to understand it's not about the abstract GDP figures. To be quite frankly, most of the population don't think even know what GDP means, to put it that way. What is the effect on people's living standards? And people's living standards remain below where they were in 2008 before the financial crisis, and this is why they tend to be against all the main parties at the present time. Historically, both the Tories and Labour have got very low ratings going into the election, which is why the minor parties can play a role, and there's a great deal of dissatisfaction.
Well, according to Mr. Cameron, in fact, he said when his party, Tories, came into power back in the year 2010, the debt situation of the UK could be as worse as of that of Greece. Mr. Oates, your comment here.
Well, there has been some measure of getting the debt down. The debt is now half, if you can consider it, is halved in terms of GDP of the country. But of course, it's only cut by a third in financial terms. So there's a dispute over how much debt actually the government since 2010 has actually eliminated. But the key thing is, who do people trust with the economy? Would that be David Cameron and George Osborne, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, or would it be Ed Miliband, the leader of the Labour Party? Most people do actually trust the Conservative leadership as being able to manage the economy better. However, this isn't being reflected in the opinion polls. Labour and the Conservatives are still, in reality, neck and neck. For some reason, the Conservatives are just not reaching out to the public as well as they should be, considering that Labour, when they were last in office, did have a whole series of economic problems with the debt going through the roof financially,
right,
and of course unemployment rising. There was a serious economic problems which are on the way to being mended within the UK. It's now the fastest growth in the industrialised world.
Mr. Ross, let me ask you.
In terms of Western countries, but of course it's still not far enough ahead in the polls to win a majority in the election.
Okay, Mr. Ross, let me ask you. Earlier, Mr. O said that the British people would trust the Conservative more on managing the economy. Do you really necessarily agree with that? Because Mr. O, of course, according to my introduction, is a Conservative Party politician.
Yeah, but the public trusts the people who increase their living standards, and they don't feel the living standards increased. Also, there's two real problems that confront the Tory party. Firstly, due to the electoral system, if the votes are tied, Labour will win more seats than the Tory party. That's just the way the electoral system works. And secondly, it's very difficult to find partners for Cameron. Really only the Unionists. For example, the Scottish National Party has already ruled out an alliance with the Tories, and Miliband is better placed, therefore, if it remains neck and neck, to do a deal after the election.
Well, Mr. Cui, of course, you are coming in from an observer perspective. It's now our election. But rather, what do you think from now until May the 7th? What would be some of the major events happening that would eventually influence the British voters' opinions about these two parties, even though they are now going neck and neck?
Yeah, exactly. As we understand now, it looks like a deadlock between especially the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. So I think now most of the observers now we are focused on how about this third party, especially this maybe a small party, but it will decide the result of the election. And one more thing is that from now to this the vote, there will be some debates. So I think that the debates, especially the quality of these leaders and how could they express their policy correctly.
Debates are important in campaigns. On the other hand, what many here in this part of the world and around the world are looking at the British politics is what it might mean for the Britain's political and also economic policy choices. Mr. Ross, in that regard, let me ask you. First of all, we see this membership of the EU. It is still being debated greatly inside the UK. Secondly, we also see the UK seem to be, at times recently, taken on a path that has never been there before. For example, even though you could argue it's a small issue, joining the AIIB as founding member despite of the dislike of the United States, because the UK was the very first among many of the European countries to do that. And people are saying, what exactly is the direction the UK is going? So with all of these things combined, how much do you think these kind of political and diplomatic choices would mean for the campaign and eventually the election?
Well, there's two different things. I think for the population, I don't think the question of the EU or the foreign policy questions will make any influence. What it does have an important influence is on what you call the establishment, including business. I will be very blunt. Britain will not leave the EU. Cameron is engaged in a fake, which is he's promising to have a referendum, but his intention is to do some deal with the European Union and then recommend to stay in. The problem is that business regards the membership of the European Union as completely non-negotiable. And a part of them are not willing even to take the risk of a referendum because something may go wrong in that. That's the thing. On the other hand, if you take the question of the AIIB, this is a limited question. It is interesting, but in the world of things, Britain remains the United States' closest ally. Actually, for understanding its political trajectory, I think more important was the fact the British Parliament voted not to support the US over bombing of Syria. This is the first major foreign policy issue for about 100 years in which I think there was a difference.
Very interesting views over there. Mr. Oz, I see you wave your head. It seems to not necessarily in agreement. What is your view? EU membership, how much does it really mean? Is Mr. Cameron serious about what he said? Secondly, is the UK now taking on a different action than only being quote-unquote the closest ally of the US?
Well, David Cameron did, of course, want to join any American action against the government of President Assad in Syria, but it was the British House of Commons that rejected that and forced a change of mind of David Cameron and prevented him from going to war. With regards to Britain's membership of the European Union, I think it will be an important issue because, of course, there is a party within the UK known as the United Kingdom Independence Party, which is still relatively small. It only has 2 seats within the British House of Commons. However, they take votes primarily from the Conservative Party, primarily from voters who are disgruntled over David Cameron's European policy, and they do want out of the European Union, and it could be that party which actually stops David Cameron getting into government, because if